Well, I was born near San Rafael in Northern California. I'm a fourth generation Californian. And I grew up in Redondo Beach and Laguna Beach. I'm a longtime surfer and body surfer. I absolutely love the ocean. And I remember when I was 6, the neighbors had sand that they got from the Paula mine down in San Diego, where there's tourmalines and kunzites and a lot of jewels. And it had little tiny gemstones, little tourmaline crystals glistening in it. And I would, when they weren't looking, I would sneak over and sift out a few little crystals. The first time was exciting to me. And I remember when I was a young child, you know, you think, when I grew up, I want to be an astronaut or something. Well, what I thought what would really be it, there was 3 mysteries that absolutely fascinated me when I was a child. One of them was that magnets, how they could pick up iron filings even through a piece of paper. The other one was gyroscopes. When they were spinning, you'd push them this way and they'd go that way. And the third one was prisms. When you put them in the sun, a rainbow came out. And those things were the mysteries. I thought my ideal occupation would be a research scientist when I grew up, who was studying magnetism, and the prisms became the crystals and gyroscopes. And that was the dream of mine as a kid. When I was 14 and living in Laguna Beach, the local rock hound had a stone cutting class underneath the Presbyterian church. It cost 10 cents a week, which paid for the electricity. I was kind of astounded when it went up to 25 cents a year later. And I cut my first stone, a white banded agate. I followed his directions exactly. And when I finished, I showed it to him. He turned and looked at it for a long time. And he said, "You've done this before, haven't you?" And I said, "No, this is my first stone. I followed exactly your directions." And he said, "Well, that's the best first stone I've ever seen. You ought to consider a career in this." I thought, well, that's nice to hear. And I was cutting little tiny, beautiful gemstones and opals. And I walked along in my high school class in metal crafts, we were using wire and cutting sheet metal and bending it around and soldering it to make jewelry. And I saw a jewelry store in Laguna where the rings were fully 3-dimensional. And I thought, I have no idea how they do that. I was absolutely fascinated. And the old jeweler there took a liking to me and took me on as his playful apprentice. I asked him a year or 2 later why he did that, because I saw him throw other people out of the shop who came in asking him for pay to teach him what they're doing. And he said, "When you first came in, my first visit, when I left, he said, 'Oh, you like opals? Let me give you one.' He gave me an uncut opal about this size, about $75 worth. And, you know, I was buying stones that cost $2. So, and I asked later, and he said, 'Well, when you first came in, I perceived you had the capacity for spiritual development. And so I appealed to your greed to be sure that you would come back.'" And during the time when I was with him, it was like he was a big tuning fork and I was a little one, and I was shaking inside. I developed an interest. In the library, I found a book on Vedanta philosophy, and I was reading from Vivekananda. And I read about Advaita, about non-duality. And I was like, wow, the stars were going off in my head. And that was very exciting for me. And I noticed this old jeweler, whenever I asked him questions, he sat for a while and thought before he answered me. And no one else did that. That kind of impressed me. And then instead of answering me his answer, he would give me a principle with which I could dig out my own answer. And I could use that principle as I grew and dig deeper. And I thought, that's interesting. He's not teaching me what he knows. He's teaching me how to think. And after a year of this, I said, "How come you know what you know?" And he had been an opera singer as a young man. When he laughed, the windows of the store shook and kind of scared me. He said, "You know a lot how long I've awaited this question, Robert. You're very young, so I had to wait. But now you've asked. I belong to a Western mystery school who teaches these mysteries. Would you like to come and visit?" And so I began my occult studies in the Tarot and Holy Kabbalah at age 15.
Wow.
Kind of early start, but that was a fascinating part of it. And there I read in the studies that the alchemists of old discovered the basic principles of existence by observing the shape of natural crystals, the geometry of them. And I went, wow, that's really exciting. And this geometry of crystals is something that's fascinated me. Well, skip ahead. I'd working as a therapist in Basel, Switzerland. A friend came up to me and said, "I can make your muscles strong in just a few seconds." And being a bodybuilder, I thought, you know, it takes weeks, it takes months to make your muscles strong. And I said, "I don't believe that." And she said, "Straighten your arm and hold it into your side real tight." And she pulled, and I couldn't hold it in. And then she rubbed a couple of spots in my chest and back, and then I could hold it in, and it was functionally a whole lot stronger. I was utterly fascinated by this. How could that be? And what I learned is that we have like circuit breakers in our brain, and when they're working, you know, your muscles are in fine motoric control, fine coordination. And when the circuit is blown, the muscle kind of goes, "Huh, what am I supposed to do?" and then overreacts. So it's this state of the muscle circuit being turned on or turned off. I learned how to test this. And then, much to my surprise, I found a patient. She could not hold her legs together or push them apart, but she could when she held a chrysoberyl. When she put it down, she couldn't. When she picked it up, she could again. And I was utterly fascinated by this. And that's what began my studies of saying, well, what do the different gemstones do? And I had a pretty good gemstone collection. So anyone who would let me push in their arms and legs and test all their muscles, I tested all my gemstones. And I tested people so long that they had sore muscles the next day. And I'm grateful for the people who put up with me doing all my research. But I made all these wonderful discoveries of which stones turn on which neurological circuits. And I went on with this and did my doctor thesis on the effect of gemstones on human neurological functioning, and put a little science under the often woo-woo area of healing with gemstones. I mentioned to you in our call that it's one of my pet peeves. People who are into gemstone healing like to use scientific sounding language when they really don't know one end of their alimentary canal from the other in the area of science. And they say things like, the stones have an electromagnetic field that radiates out and influences us. And I studied physics. I put my best meters in the stone. They don't have any electromagnetic field. That's not true. But I called up the world authority on subtle medicine, subtle energies, Albert Popp in German. In Germany, I speak German. And I said, how is it possible that the stones have these effects? And he said, I think you're right. They don't radiate out towards us, but we radiate out. Our bodies have an electromagnetic field, especially in your hands. Mm-hmm. When you hold something, your magnetic field goes out through that and returns to you changed. His metaphor, kind of like bat echolocation. The bat is sending out a signal and then he can see when it reflects back. So it's not that the stones are affecting us, it's that we are affecting ourselves via the stones. That made more scientific sense to me, because I've seen the electromagnetic field, it goes out and comes back changed. And the human body, we have, we can produce sound and we can hear sound. These things, we breathe in and out, we have a heartbeat that pumps and stops. So everything is in an alternate cycle. So if we have electromagnetic producing, we do produce electromagnetic fields, you can measure them, then we must have electromagnetic sensors also. We know that animals do, birds migrate with them, for example. They can tell where the magnetic field of the earth lies. And they've done an experiment with humans where they took them out in the middle of the wilderness, let them stand on top of a hilltop, and they put them in a car and drove them to someone else and let them get out where they were blindfolded. They had no idea. And they said, point to the hillside where you were before. And most of them could do it. But almost no one could do it if they were in the city. Because in the city, there's electrical power lines and televisions and so much, those magnetic fields are much stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. So we do have these subtle senses. And I met Marcel Vogel, the scientist who discovered the red phosphor that gives us our color TVs. He discovered the crystal that's on the floppy disk that made the computer world possible. And he discovered how insects glow in the dark and made those little things you can break that light up for several hours. So he's a brilliant scientist. And while he worked for IBM, he earned them billions of dollars by making the crystal that made floppy disks and hard disks for computers possible. And when he left IBM, he said, I'd like to have a present. I'd like an electron microscope. They'd never given anything like that away, but they needed a new one. So they gave him his old one for his personal laboratory. And I got to meet him and show him the phenomenon that I discovered. And utterly fascinating, the work. Scientist, he became utterly convinced that with quartz crystal, we can hurt and heal, and that at a distance. And that particular teaching has been amongst the Native Americans and even the Aborigines from Australia also say with quartz or crystal, you can heal or hurt, and that at a distance.
And hurt, what do you mean? So I have a quartz right here.
For example, a substance like a poison, ink. Let me back up a little bit. So if you touch a gemstone, it turns on a neurological circuit. If you set the gemstone behind a quartz crystal and point it at yourself, you no longer have to touch the gemstone. Whatever's behind the crystal gets projected and has its effect upon you energetically. So along the axis, if you point the crystal at yourself and put the stone behind it, it'll have the same effect upon you as holding the stone. So as well as stones turning on neurological circuits, things that aren't good for you will turn off neurological circuits. If you hold a bottle of, Roundup glyphosate, poison insecticide, you'll find all sorts of circuits get turned off. And if you put it behind the quartz crystal aimed at you, the same circuits get turned off. So you can hurt or heal at a distance with quartz crystal. So the quartz crystal, it's quite interesting. I researched and wrote about this in my doctoral thesis too. Most all of the medical uses or the scientific uses of quartz crystal for stabilizing vibrations, for making quartz crystal watches that are extremely accurate. All these functions have a correlate in terms of your own personal development. For example, in the CB radio that the truckers used to have, each channel you'd set on was a physical quartz crystal cut to a resonant frequency. And the other person on the other end would have a quartz crystal, and you'd send your quartz crystal vibrating, and it'd go through the air to the other person, and it would start them vibrating, and they amplify that signal. And that's how CB radio works. So it's kind of a physical form of telepathy, action at a distance without any wires. Well, you can program a quartz crystal for that purpose. I did with my girlfriend in Germany, and I went to Hawaii. So that's 11 hours that way, about as far away as you can get on the earth. And I programmed the crystal so that I said, when you want me to call you, just set the crystal on your forehead and inwardly call me. And I'd be sitting there typing away on my doctorate thesis, and I go, boing, call Anita. And I'd call her, and she said, wow, I was really fast this time. And it was incredible. One time I was at the beach, and I received the signal, and it took me 20 minutes to get home. She said, you were really slow this time. It took about 20 minutes. I said, yeah, I know. But as an amplifier for telepathy, quartz crystal is amazing. It really does work. And it's utterly fascinating.
Which one is that?
Quartz crystal, the
Just
one you held in your hand.
Clear
Just quartz
quartz,
crystal. You bet. The most, silicon dioxide, sand, beach sand, it's the most common element in the crust of the earth. But it has incredible properties when it's crystallized. Mm-hmm. And if you ground it up into an extremely fine powder, it wouldn't have that effect. It's not the chemistry, it's the structure of the crystal that does it.
And the shape.
Well, interestingly, in quartz, there are 6 silicon dioxide. There are 6 silicon atoms that form a spiral, and number 7 is above number 1, so like the second story of the spiral staircase. So the atoms of silicon are actually 6 of them in a rounded circle. And if you look at the quartz crystal, it has 6 sides and 6 triangles on the tip. So it is outward macroscopic form is the perfect reflection of its inner microscopic molecular form. So you could say in a sense that quartz crystal is a perfect expression of its own inner essence. That it is outwardly as you see it in structure like it is inwardly. So in a sense, it is utterly true to itself. Now, we humans, we have this funny thing called free will, and we can go really off ball and get very out of balance. We aren't like the animals. We can get wrong by choice or by accident. And quartz crystal can be a big help to help you get realigned to your central self, because it is a physical manifestation of something that is a perfect expression of its inner truth. So if you're wanting to be more in harmony with your own inner truth, quartz crystal can be a good companion. So while I was working with patients, I had a patient who could turn her head. I worked in a medical clinic in Switzerland where the doctors sent me all their impossible patients. Whatever they had, if the person didn't get well with their medicine, they sent them to me. And I got pretty good. With those impossible patients, 1/4 of them were fully healed, 50% of them got better, and 25% I couldn't help at all. But from the impossible patients, I figured that was pretty good. Mm-hmm. Well, I had a patient who could only turn her head about 15 degrees each side before it was extremely painful. And I tested a gemstone that would balance all of her circuits. It turned out to be a fluorite in her case. She held it in her hand and rotated her head right around to her shoulders and said, "Das gibt doch nicht, that can't be." And she put it down and immediately. She only had 15 degrees of range. She said, "Could I have one of those, please?" Well, another patient, she was quite large, and sitting up from lying down was the most painful thing of all. She had a lot of low back pain. And I tested a gemstone that balanced her meridians, and she sat up to look at it, looked kind of surprised, lay down and sat up again, and set the stone down and lay down and tried to sit up and cried out, picked the stone up and sat up and threw it into her massive bra and said, "Mine." I assured her she could keep one like that, but I had a few more tests, please, and she fished it out for me. So a little scientist, I put it in an envelope, and I took 9 other stones about the same size and weight and put them in 9 other envelopes, mixed them all up in a bowl and put the bowl in front of her and said, "Pick up one envelope and I'm going to try to sit up." And I left the room. When I came back, she was sitting up smiling. He said, "Only this envelope removes the pain." We opened it up, and there was the same stone that I'd tested before. So I did enough of these double-blind experiments to think, no, I'm not just fooling myself. There really is something here. I'm a scientist. I have to have those kind of proofs to convince me that I'm not just using suggestion or something like that.
Definitely. I've got some fluorite here, actually.
Yes.
It's a big slab.
Yes, nice, a Chinese type. Fluorite, one effect it has upon everyone is that when you are neurologically disorganized, when your representation system of your body is reversed so that right is left. And this happens if I test people. About 1/3 of everyone I test is in this state. And we all are under enough stress. We kind of lose it and get mixed up. You may have noticed sometimes you turn to avoid something, but you turn the wrong way and bump into it. Or you try to say 62 and it comes out 26. Then you start noticing, I got things switched. And the switching is the popular term for that. Well, fluorite will correct a portion of this switching problem, the one that has to do with coordination. They call it the gates, when you're using right and left arm at the same time. If that blows out your circuits, it won't when you have fluorite with you. And I've shown this to sports people. The women's tennis champion or volleyball champion in Switzerland carries a piece with her now to keep her in perfect coordination so she can do her sport best. So it's been quite useful and quite fascinating to see how these things actually do work in a repeatable way, even if you have it in an envelope, you don't know which is which. That does its thing. And so it's been a fascinating work finding, the gemstones. And my opinion is this: the gemstones are like extremely effective crutches. They turn on neurological circuits that are off, but they aren't off because of a lack of gemstones. Like you don't have psychological problems because of a lack of Valium. They are useful crutches, but in terms of the working with patients or clients, if I want to find out what all their imbalances are first, find a gemstone or something else that when they touch it, it eliminates all their imbalances. And then I take it away from them and I test why do they have these imbalances and what do they need to do to get a lasting correction of them. And there's going to be behavioral changes. They may change their diet. They may need to drink more water and eat less sugar. They may need to change their posture so they're not dropping down, squeezing all their internal organs. And after a session, patients are generally motivated to try these things. But as soon as they go home and get stressed again, they forget it and they don't do it. And getting this patient compliance is one of the biggest challenges for the therapist, that people will do the things that are going to actually get them better. Well, if they take their energy balancing gemstone with them, they can get into situations that would put them out of balance, and it doesn't put them out of balance. And the probability that they actually do their homework and get better goes way up. Well, I use the gemstone to support the healing work we're doing and to keep the person in balance under stress.
I wonder if there'd be a good gemstone for 3-year-old tantrums.
Now that's an interesting one. 2 and 3-year-olds, it is the time for tantrums, especially much more common with boys than girls. But the tantrum I think part of it is that the utter frustration of not yet being able to verbally express yourself in a way adequately, and the other person not understanding and just going, "Don't you understand it?" That's part of it. It's fascinating because at 2, you can play with yourself, but not with other kids. At 3, it's time when you can start to play with other kids and actually have sharing and stuff.
That's right.
And if you haven't learned that by 4 and you're kind of above all this and the world is stupid and I don't like adults, and you have that kind of distance and antisocial attitude at age 4, the prognosis is very bad. If you are still at that stage at age 4, you'll probably be a juvenile delinquent by 15 and in jail by 20-something. So it's really important to get that socialization where the kid is enjoyed by other kids and by other adults by age 4. So that's a really important time. And that's one of the things I've been working on now is training children in learning to play musical instruments. I'll make a little jump here because it's one of my other areas. I'm a musician, and what I found, the latest research shows that when you actually learn to play a musical instrument, that it restructures your brain. You grow neural connections, the auditory center expands inside. And if you look at the bridge between the right and the left side of the brain, the big 100 million cell corpus callosum that literally lets your right and left side talk with each other, it gets thicker when you study music. It has more nerves and you have more complex interaction between right and left sides of the brain. Part of when you're playing music, you do different things with your 2 hands at the same time. So you have your 2 halves of your brain doing 2 jobs at the same time. And very few people do that otherwise if they're not playing music. So it's really a special kind of training. And what they found is that if a child learns to play music at age 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that it gives them an advantage in school and an advantage in life. Because to learn music, you have to differentiate different sounds and give them different meanings. And that's the same thing when you're learning language. You have to hear words and assign meanings to sounds. So by learning music first, you're training that part of your brain that's going to be busy learning language later, and it gives the child a tremendous advantage. So my work right now, I'm creating the world's easiest to play musical instruments. You just play a number pad and press buttons to play chords. Presto, you're playing music. So you have the words with a little number on top of it. When that number comes up in the song, you press that button and you're playing songs. So anyone can instantly play music.
I saw that your program online. I was watching it yesterday with all of the music notes and where you had the music up here, like the chords, and then you had the keys with the associated letters, right?
Yes,
and or
yes.
numbers. It's very cool.
If you can read, then you can play music. And if you can't read, it's interesting because children learn to sing songs before they can read. So that's true. So if you have the numbers, or even bigger, since most songs just use 3 or 4 chords, 1, 4, 5, and 6 will play most music that's on the radio. So I put a picture of the kid on picture number 1, and mommy and daddy on 4 and 5, and his dog on number 6 or something like that. And he can look at the pictures above the words, and a bouncing ball comes across. And when he sees the picture coming to the mommy, he presses the mommy button, and he's playing music before he can read. And the advantage of that is that he'll be looking at the words that he's already singing and seeing the picture to button. So he'll associate the words he's seeing with the words that he's already learning to sing. So the side effect of this is he'll be learning to read at the same time. So it's an exciting invention. I think it's going to be wonderful. I'm just finishing up the coding. I have a coder who in Nepal right now who's working on this for me to try to get the last bugs out of it so it's ready for market.
Well, after speaking with you yesterday, I downloaded Classical Kids playlists on Spotify. And this morning when I got up, I started playing classical, and I thought any downtime when he's just doing independent play, I'm just going to have that in the background. Good. And keep it in the background all the time.
It's helpful. The studies show that listening to music does have an effect upon you. It changes your heartbeat and your emotional state and calming, and it can be quite useful, and especially the kid, because you're programming in the complexity of the music when you're listening to classical or jazz, so that his brain is looking for patterns, because kids' brains are trying to make sense of everything, and they're the pattern seekers. So you're giving them a more complex pattern thing with classical music than the popular music. So the brains get developed just listening to it. But playing an instrument goes way beyond that. It's kind of the difference between watching sports or playing sports. You can get excited and have an emotional rush watching sports, but there's a lot of more benefit when you're playing sports. You get coordinated, you get team interaction, you get stronger. So the same thing, playing music does a whole lot more for the brain. So that's the other area. So the gemstones, returning to the gemstones, recently I discovered that minerals of the periodic scale, the elements, hydrogen, helium, the solid ones, if they are in crystalline form, have similar effects to gemstones have in turning on muscle circuits of the body. So the crystal beryl, which is a beryllium aluminum silicate, as I remember, beryllium, the element that's in chrysoberyl, gives it its beryl name, if it's crystallized, has the same effect as chrysoberyl. So it's the atoms of beryllium in the chrysoberyl arranged in the lattice structure, the regular geometry, like in a crystal of the metal itself, that has this effect upon us. It's very interesting. So it's not just the chemistry of what the mineral is, it's the actual structure of the crystal that we're interacting with that has this effect upon us. So crystals do have something. You could probably say, you know, our definition in science of living forms is rather limited. We exclude minerals from living forms. But I think that's just because we're higher up in the scale, we don't recognize them as being living forms. Mm-hmm. I think that everything is alive, the whole universe is alive, and that crystals are the highest form of life in the mineral kingdom. They have structure, and while they're growing, they reproduce their structure perfectly. Every layer, the same atoms in the same direction, the same orientation. So they have a kind of reproduction. So, you know, crystals, it's quite amazing. You know, when I was a child, I had a crystal radio. You took a little cat's whisker of metal and you touched it onto the crystal in different spots with your headphones, and I could get 2 radio stations. So I could listen to the Dodgers games real quietly in my room when the parents didn't know, because I had my crystal radio. Crystals are really quite amazing what they can do, both in science and in personal development.
And so, you know, what are some good resources for learning more? Say I wanted to learn more. Do you have any good resources that you could share?
Well, you know, I have websites and information, and I teach courses. So the particular things that I've discovered, they aren't yet public knowledge, so you can't just go and learn them somewhere. There are hundreds of books about healing with gemstones, and most of them talk about the color of the gemstones. Red stones give you energy and vitality and aggression and sexual drive, and yellow stones are intellectually stimulating, and blue stones are calming. And that's color psychology. That's not gemstone healing.
So I read the other day that citron is good for the solar plexus chakra.
Again, they're orienting this according to the American Indians of the different colors of the chakras, and using the stones for activating the chakras. It's not incorrect, but citrine is just, if you take an amethyst, nice and purple, and you put it in the oven for a few hours, it turns orange. It turns into citrine. It's the same thing, but it's a different color. Yes. If you put that amethyst in the oven, heat it up 500 degrees for a few hours, it'll turn the color of your citrine.
I didn't know that.
In fact, most of the citrine you buy is heated amethyst.
Get out.
Now, if it happens in the earth where it gets hot by a volcano or something, it turns that color, then you have natural citrine, but it's the same thing. So these are actually effects of color. And we have most of the healing effects that you read about in books are because of the color of the stone. And certainly color is an important factor, but the work I've shown, for example, fluorite will turn on the gate function, so you can use arm and opposite leg with coordination. And any color of fluorite will do. It doesn't matter what color it is. And fluorite comes in all colors, from clear to white to black and brown and every rainbow color in between. And they all do the same thing energetically. So the thing I've discovered is different than the color healing you read about in most gemstone healing books.
Very cool. And so do you have any courses coming up?
You know, by reason of COVID and everything else, I'm not teaching active courses right now. My Facebook site that I showed you, we can put the link in later. There, I talk about the gemstones and show several examples of the things that I've discovered. It's one of the things on my list. You know, I have these unfinished books. One of them of the use of gemstones. It's one of them, the 7 stages of spiritual development. And I put all of those on the shelf to get my music project done and to get this age reversal project going. So right now I'm laser focused. The gemstone's fascinating and I want to get back to that. It's utterly valuable research and totally exciting to me. And it's my own discoveries. And teaching my own discoveries is something that makes me extremely happy. So I will get back to that. But right now my work is with making musical instruments, because I think right now the kids are locked at home. And I interviewed a lot of homeschooling mothers and asked them, what is it that you need in your life? And what they said, oh, I need a full-time nanny. I never have any time off. I didn't have any time free when the kids were at school, and now they're always here. Well, if I can give them an instrument that the kid is totally wrapped up in and playing songs, that gives mother a break. Plus, it's good for the child. It trains their brain and gives them advantage in life, which mother wants also. So I think this is a wonderful market that will be really helpful. So I want to get this out now while we're still stuck at home.
That sounds like a good plan. And tell me about the age reversal initiative.
Well, it turns out the way doctors define your biological age, they measure a bunch of biomarkers, like how much plaque is on your artery of your carotid and how much low density lipids are in your blood, little small heavy ones. And they have a bunch of different things that they say, okay, according to these studies, you're X number of years older or younger than your chronological age. And I went with about 5 young people up to Reno to have us all studied. And they all came in 10 to 20 years older than their physical bodies. And they were all like vegetarians and very careful with their diet and meditators. And I came in at 18 years younger than my physical body. And they said, well, what are your habits? I said, well, I exercise a lot and I eat a lot of red meat. And they went, red meat. and I worked for 1.5 years with Michael Mooney, and we founded Age Reversal Now. And we got a trademark for that. And he's passed on now, and I've taken over the baton. And he showed me all the different, he was into the chemical means of reducing your age, and I was into the biological behavioral means. So, for example, as you get older, more and more cells get old. They're called senolytic cells, the same root as senile. They get old and senile. They can't multiply anymore. And they put out chemicals that are real nasty and inflame all the cells around them. And so most of the work of age reversal is aimed at reducing the number of senolytic cells in your body. Okay. Well, Michael would do that by taking a chemotherapy agent along with some quercetin. and he would be sick as a dog for a couple of weeks, but all the less viable cells would die off. Well, I would do the same thing by fasting. I go without food for a few days and just drink water, and my body goes, gee, what am I going to eat? How about these senolytic cells over here? How about these precancerous cells over here? And it feasts on those, and my stem cells come out of the bone marrow and say, oh, some cells needed, and makes new baby cells that are brand new. So the average age of the cells in my body is going down. I'm getting younger. So this is true age reversal. A lot of different ways to stimulate this. It turns out as you get older, the rate at which you age gets faster. So between 50 and 60, let's say that's 10 units of getting older. Between 60 and 70, it's 25 units of getting older. Between 70 and 80, it's 90 units of getting older. So you get older faster as you get old. So slowing down this curve, it's quite possible to live a healthy life until, you know, a few days or a few weeks before your death when you fall apart and die. Instead of what we're seeing today is people having decades of decrepitude. They live longer, but they're in horrible shape. As various comedians and philosophers have said, if I'd known I was going to live so long, I would have taken better care of myself. So I'm training people what this taking better care of yourself is. There's simple things. One of the ones that's not so nice, but with every species they've tried it with, if you restrict the number of calories they eat, like they have a group of rats and they measure how much food they eat and they give the other rats half that much. The ones that get half that much food live 1.5 times as long. So you can extend your life by not having to eat so much food. It's not very pleasant, but it works. Well, it turns out that there's other ways, herbs and things like that, that will convince your body that you're not eating food. It's similar to fasting, or reducing your protein to about 10 or 15 grams and eating other food. Your body goes, oh, gee, I don't have any protein. It goes into the same autophagy, eating the old cells. So there's ways of doing it without having to starve yourself. And chemical ones that convince your body that that's true also. I experimented with one synthetic drug called SR 9009. You can look it up. It was created as a circadian rhythm modulator. I don't even know exactly what that means. But one of the side effects when you take it is that your body thinks it's nighttime, which is the time to burn fat and build muscle. So when you take it, your body burns up the fat it has and puts on muscle. And even if you sit utterly passive, you get more muscular and you get more slender.
And did it work?
It definitely works. And it was advertisements in the magazine for the animal study saying, exercise in a bottle. Well, if you also exercise, you put on muscle much faster. So it's an experimental research drug. It's not approved for human use, but you can buy it for yourself and use it legally. So I did. And I put on 12 pounds of muscle in about 3 months, working out in the gym and taking this stuff. So there's ways that you can speed up the processes of healing or of regeneration or of rebuilding muscle that are utterly fascinating. One of the ones that's really exciting for me, the mushroom lion's mane, is proven to be neurogenerative. It grows new nerves and it remyelinates nerves. And if you're trying to learn a new task, or if you're trying to recover some terrible injury, it's extremely helpful. And Paul Stamets, the mushroom man up in Oregon, he has a protocol where you take your lion's mane and 20 minutes later, you take a tablet of niacin, vitamin B3, I think. Niacin makes you flush. It opens up all your superficial capillaries. You get real red in the face and it itches like crazy. But the lion's mane then goes all through your body. And he said he's had many cases in which he has regenerated and healed peripheral neuropathy, like when the hands and feet of the diabetic patients start to become tingly and painful, or they numb and they can't feel them. The combination lion's mane followed by niacin will bring the lion's mane down to that area of your body and regrow the nerves, and that problem goes away.
Wow.
So there's some really exciting ones. He says it works best if you put a microdose of psilocybin in with it, and that's legal now in Oregon. But unless you
magic mushrooms.
Yeah, magic mushrooms. A small dose of that along with it makes it work far better, he claims. And since they're illegal in most places, you either have to grow them or go outside the law to experiment with that. So I can't recommend this, but then I can say what he recommends. So yeah. I'm learning for my age reversal. You have to be very careful with the way you formulate things, the way you say things. Like, for example, in California, if I take a piece of orange and put it in someone's mouth and then test their arm, I've given them a medicine and I can go to jail. But if I hand them the plate and they put the piece of orange in their mouth, I can do my test. That's okay. That's legal.
Oh my
You
goodness.
just have to learn. You can't say heal. You can't say you can't say medical terms, but you can say things like it balances the energy. It's also true, but it gets you around the law. So I'm just an energy balancer. That people get well and their diseases go away is just a pleasant side effect, but I'm not causing that. I'm just doing the energy balancing, and their body is doing that. So I have to have proper wording so I don't get in trouble, because I'm doing some pretty magical healing work, and I have to stay within the realm of the law.
That's amazing and very exciting. And I'm sure a lot of people are appreciative.
A funny one from my clinic in Basel. The doctor sent me a patient who had wounds all around the edge of his tongue. Pussy, stinky, horrible wounds. And they kept happening about every 3 or 6 months. They would happen again. And no matter what drugs they gave him, they couldn't stop it. So they sent him to me, as usual, in the clinic. And I asked him, what can't you do when this happens? And he said, well, I can't be with people. Not only does it look bad, it stinks. And I said, well, what do you do all by yourself otherwise? And he got defensive. He said, well, when I get home from work, my kids need some attention. We have dinner, and then my wife needs some attention. Then I have to go to sleep, and then it's time to get up and go to work. And I said, so you have no time to yourself now? And he says, yeah, that's right. I said, well, before you were married, what did you do all by yourself? And he thought for a minute. He said, I used to read paperback books and play squash by myself in the squash court. So I got out my prescription paper, wrote a big RX, read paperback books and play squash by yourself, and handed it to him. And he said, do you think that could help? And I said, nothing else helped, so why don't you try it? I never saw him again until 3 months later on the tram, incidentally. He smiled and pulled out a folded over paperback book from his pocket and said, I read a lot now and I play squash, and it's never come back.
Whoa.
So these are the kind of magical healings, because it's outside of the realm of medicine. It's more psychology. But this, what is the symptom saying? What is it preventing you from doing or forcing you to do? And if you take care of that, then you don't need the symptom anymore.
It's true.
I had one patient with ankles about this big. Ever since 3 weeks before he was due to go to military service, his ankles swole up. He was now 40. And I said, if they got well now, would you have to go in the military? And he said, no, I'm excluded now. And I looked at him, I said, well, then you don't need it anymore. He looked shocked. Turned out what he needed was an hour of contact with another human. He was there with his wife, and I said, are you willing to do this? And they said, well, yes, but there's no time. I said, okay, here's your prescription. Turn off the TV an hour earlier. They both blushed. Go to bed an hour earlier. Get up an hour earlier. Go to the bathroom and freshen up and come back in bed and hold each other for an hour. 3 weeks later, his ankles were normal size and he was running and dancing. He'd been that way for 30 years, practically. So these are the way what I'm proposing now is to take a group of men through this process where I use all of my bag of tricks. I do what I call shotgun therapy. I really don't know which of these things is going to help you. So we do a whole bunch of things that could help. And one or another of those is really working, and they get better. So right now I have the pilot project. I need to gather testimonials and case histories. So I have a really good case, and then I can present it on a big scale. This is going to be one of my life works. It'll generate a lot of wealth for me as well. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, it's so brilliant. You're doing so many wonderful things. It's fascinating. I love it. I love hearing it. And you're helping people, Yeah. And I think there's no better life work.
Well, I found in my life, I won't do a job if it does not provide some sort of useful service for others. I can do a job for a short time to gain some money for a project, but I almost never worked for anyone else my whole life. I've had the luxury of working for myself. But unless the work that I propose to do has that quality of social positive effect on others, I don't stay with it. I give it up before I become successful.
Yeah.
So I know I took care of my mother for more than a dozen years, the last years of her life, and my father a few years before that. And I lived on her annuity during that time. And so now I'm going back to work at this ripe age. I turned 70 this year. I did 20 pull-ups on my birthday. I'm as fit as can be. And with the help of the cognitive enhancers and the improved diet and the exercise, my mind is sharper than it's been since my 20s or something. 10 years ago, I was walking into rooms going, what did I come in this room for? And that's gone now. I've really rejuvenated myself. It's getting younger. This age reversal is a very real thing. And I think it's going to be big.
When's your birthday?
July 14, Bastille
Oh,
Day.
you're a Cancer.
Yeah, sun and moon.
Oh, sun and moon. What about your ascendant? Do you know your ascendant?
Taurus.
Ah, very cool. Do you know it's Torsten's birthday today?
Whose birthday? Torsten's birthday? Yes, it is. Yes,
Yes.
I tried to call him, but he didn't answer.
Yeah, I
Yep.
wrote on his Facebook wall. I wished him a happy birthday. So
Yeah, yeah.
he's an Aquarian, very, very suitable for what he's doing with his work.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
He visited me in Laguna Beach last year, and we showed each other our Turo work. And with completely different orient. He's historical stuff from the past and put it together in a brand new way. I'm more the traditional Jewish mysticism kind of Turo studies. And so it was utterly fascinating. I love what he's doing.
I love what he's doing too. And it's actually kind of, I don't know, it's interesting because it's like it's groundbreaking in the sense that it removes all divination out of the mix, right? And so many people in the tarot community are like, I'm channeling the spirit to tell you what the cards mean, and Torsten's like, that's not what it is. That's not what it is at all, right?
There he and I share, because I don't do any divination. They're oracles of wisdom for me, but things I use in meditation, but I don't try to tell fortunes.
Yeah, no, but
I was at a party once and a woman came up and pushed my thumb back and said, "Oh my goodness," she was a palmist, "you must be so versatile that you never get anything done." And I pulled my hand back. I said, "I didn't ask for you to give me negative suggestions." I don't like people telling my fortune. I tend to take their suggestions and make them true instead of my own stuff.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I've enjoyed our chat. There's been so many wonderful golden nuggets of information that I think a lot of people will enjoy to hear. So,
well, send me a copy and let me know when you're going to have it up for people to listen to.
I most definitely will. I will send you a version to see, and yeah, maybe we can do this again sometime.
I look forward to it. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you very much.